Grace, peace, and spoiler alert, I'm standing up for this one because I watched The Two Popes. My name's Ryan. I'm the movie pastor. I watch movies and I find theological connections in them. I find the ways in which movies that are not explicitly about God and ministry have to do with the things that Christians believe and hope and what messages they're sending, interpreting them as a text. And I watched a movie about two popes. So I didn't have to dig real deep on this one to find theology. This was a movie about the people who have been chosen to lead the Church of Jesus Christ, the Roman Catholic Church. It's a movie about people in ministry. And so I dressed in a way that I dress for special ministry occasions, for funerals, for particularly liturgical services, things like Ash Wednesday. And it's a movie about liberalism versus conservatism. It's a movie about the divide between these two characters and the unity between them, what they have in common. I normally say grace, peace, and spoiler alert, but it's not so much a spoiler alert this time. If you are familiar with the history of the Roman Catholic Church, it's very recent history. Cardinal Ratzinger was elected to the office of Pope. He took the title of Pope Benedict the 16th, following the mantle of Pope Benedict the 15th, who was a conservative. He was someone who held the line and tried to maintain the church in the way that it had been hundreds of years before Benedict the 16th, or at least I think it's hundreds of years. I'm not a canon scholar, I'm a Presbyterian. Anyway, Benedict was a very conservative pope. He spent time, for one thing, he insulted Protestants. He said that you can't really call our churches at all, or maybe you can't. He, in some ways, rolled back some of the reforms that John Paul II had made. And in the midst of his reign, there was an issue with priests who were abusing underage boys. Pedophile priests. Benedict, in the movie, admits that he knew about it, and he didn't take action. The Catholic Church has been complicit and has been demonstrated to have been complicit in numerous ways for knowing that there were people who were predators, and instead of turning them over to legal authorities, they claimed to take care of it on their own, hoping to believe in forgiveness. They shifted those priests around and avoided scandal for themselves, so they thought, and it came out, and it was an absolute disgrace. The church is not supposed to be that way. The Presbyterian Church is actually built in a lot of ways to avoid those kinds of scandals. John Knox, who was living up in Scotland, saw the issues that were created by Bloody Mary Tudor. He said, man, the head of state should not be the head of a church, and everyone is a sinner, so we need to balance powers. So me, as the pastor of my church, I answer to a session and to deacons and to a presbytery, which is a community of other leaders of other churches in my region. And there are these checks and balances because we don't give any sinful person too much power. But even still, we've had issues. There was an issue a couple years ago where someone who was a youth minister, so didn't have quite the same rigorous system that ordained people have, got in trouble with some underage people, and instead of following through with church discipline, denied the authority of church discipline, left the presbytery, left the region, and without anybody knowing, joined a different region who hadn't heard about that guy and found themselves in a youth minister position again. This is real stuff. This happens. It happens in my church. It could happen in your church. What are we going to do about it? Well, what Benedict the 16th did about it was abdicated the papal throne. He stepped down from being a pope, and he let the person who was almost elected pope when he was elected take over, knowing that stepping down would mean that would be the most promising candidate. Cardinal Julio Bergoglio of Argentina was the next likely candidate. And so the two popes follows the story of the conversation between the sitting Pope Benedict and Cardinal Bergoglio, who would come to become Pope and take on the name Pope Francis, the first Pope ever to take the name of Francis, the name of St. Francis of Assisi, the one who said, "Rebuild my church, which is in ruins," who heard that and who sought to rebuild the crumbling church, and who spent time with the poorest of the poor and with the birds of the field, the St. Francis, the Reformer. So what's with this meeting of the minds between the liberal and the conservative? For one thing, those words aren't especially helpful, because when people hear liberal, they think Democrat. When they hear conservative, they think Republican. And that applies in some ways, but that's not really what we're talking about when we talk about theologically liberal and theologically conservative. Someone who is theologically conservative thinks that the best Christianity has already happened. It's in the past somewhere, that Jesus and the Acts Church already did perfect Christianity, and what we need to do is not mess it up, not change anything, and stick to the core fundamentals that have always guided us. Theological liberals believe in reform. They believe that God is still speaking. They believe that the perfect church is yet to come. The kingdom of heaven is on its way. It's breaking through into our reality, and the church can do better and will do better, and in participation with Christ, we can get closer and closer to his will for the church that he is building. And so, Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, is a conservative. He believes that if the church marries the spirit of the age, it will be abandoned in the next. That we can't make these compromises to what's popular, what's new, what's trendy. We have to stand for what is forever, what is long-standing, the truth, and not compromise and protect and maintain. Bergoglio Francis says we are broken. We've fallen off the track, and we need to go back to our roots. We need to remember the stories of people like Francis. It's not so much that we need to go back to our roots. We need to remember the stories of people like Francis, and we need to shine a light forward to make the people like Francis the leaders of the next generation, not the distant saints, the people who are on the outsides, but privilege those voices, the voices that have previously been silenced, and do a new thing, dance a new dance, sing a new song for God. What's interesting about the two popes is that even though I have a bias, I think Pope Francis is super cool, and I did not very much appreciate Pope Benedict. The Two Popes, the movie, puts these two in conversation with one another and in mutual respect. These two find a way to sit across a table from one another, to find common ground, to love one another as Christians love, and to maintain that disagreement. Man, in a world where it's an election year, there is so much increasing partisan division between liberals and conservatives, between liberal Christians and conservative Christians, between people who believe one thing and who believe another, in all sorts of subjects, between hamburger and hot dog people. Can we find a way can we find a way to be together? Can we find a way to be in relationship? And is it possible that we could even take an example from the two popes? There is a time in the life of every community, in the life of every church, in the life of every family for reform. And when it's time for reform, we need the conservative voices, the voices that want to maintain, the voices that want to step down and to say, okay, it's time to change. But there is a time when we have changed so much and we have come up with so many exciting ideas, and not all of them are good. And those are times when the conservative voice needs to clear its throat and stand back up and say, are we sure? Are we really sure? Maybe we should hold on to the good thing we have and appreciate that for a while. We need both, but we need both to be functional, and we need both to be in submission to God. I think the two popes did a great job of showing us that. And I'll see you next time on Movie Pastor.
And when in scenes of glory I sing the new song, 'twill be the old story that I